It's showtime.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny.
Washington is fundamentally corrupt. There are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible.
Made in America, heard round the world. You're listening to Blunt Force Truth. I'm Chuck Woolery, along with my co-host Mark Young, and we're here to serve you and inform you.
Well, we certainly hope so.
Yeah, right.
And on today's show, Chuck, we have Chris Voss. Now, Chris has an interesting background. He's a CEO of a company called Black Swan, and he wrote a best-selling book called Never Split the Difference. It's a book on negotiating, and I think it's an interesting topic for our audience because we have a president right now who really, I would say, really sees himself as a deal maker, as a great negotiator. Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting to hear some of the tactics, maybe the tactics the president does use, maybe some of the tactics that he might use. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we'll cover a lot of other ground with Chris. So, Chris, welcome to Blunt Force Truth.
I wish I could have had him when I was negotiating Wheel of Fortune back in the day.
Or Chris, you had him with you.
That's what I mean.
So, Chris, welcome to Blunt Force Truth.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Well, thank you.
Well, let's jump right into negotiating. We have a president who clearly, and I don't know your own position, but clearly from our view looking at the White House, it appears that this is a president who takes the negotiating on the world stage in a much more personal fashion. That it appears that rather than letting State Department people do a lot of stuff, this president likes to get his hands dirty and do his own negotiating. Is that a fair observation on your part?
I think that's pretty fair. I think it's pretty fair to say that he's not that enthusiastic about the State Department, and having dealt with the State Department a lot when I was with the FBI, I share some frustrations.
Yeah, Chuck and I are not big fans of the State Department either. So how would you grade the president as an expert in negotiation? And by the way, folks, just to add a little context to this, maybe give us a little background on your background. You were with the FBI and you were the top hostage negotiator, right?
Yeah, I was the Bureau's lead international kidnapping negotiator.
So you weren't just negotiating, for a price on a good car. You were negotiating for people's lives.
Well, a good price on a hostage.
So how would you score this president? How's this president doing as a negotiator?
Well, it depends upon the context. I mean, he's what we would call an assertive. It sounds overly obvious, but I'm a natural born assertive myself. So what we tend to get into is, we hit home runs by being blunt. But then when bluntness doesn't work anymore, we have troubles pivoting away from that. Mm-hmm. And it takes some practice. Unfortunately, the scorched earth approach leaves you a scorched earth. And you need allies in the long term, and your allies get tired of getting beaten up by you.
Well,
so sometimes it works.
Right now we've got a deal going on for the wall, the budget. So where do you see that kind of negotiating going? Because right now the president says, screw you guys, I'm going to shut down the government if I don't get my wall. Schumer is saying, we're going to shut down the government and we're going to blame you for it.
And the Republicans don't want it either, obviously, or they would have passed it in the last 2 years.
Well, if I was part of this deal, if I was one of the deal makers on any side of this, I'd have said, last time when you first brought this up, you said Mexico was going to pay for it. What happened to that?
Well, the president did answer that today. Did you see his answer to it?
No, I didn't.
Okay, his answer to it was that I always said that that Mexico would pay for it in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
And that the new improved deal that replaces NAFTA is so much better for America that Mexico will be paying for it out of the money we're saving on the new NAFTA deal.
Well, there's another side of this too that perhaps no one's touched on, and that is all of these illegals that come into the country cost us a lot of money. They cost us billions of dollars.
Oh, it's a fortune.
So that will pay for it as well.
I think the president, honestly, when the president first came out with that, we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. I never thought that was I didn't think that was his smartest move to say Mexico is going to pay for it. The issue I have right now is we have a border security issue. They arrested almost 60,000 people last month trying to come across. We have this caravan issue, and instead of dealing with border security, it seems we want to argue about, well, you said Mexico is going to pay for it, so if Mexico doesn't pay for it, we don't care about having a border anymore. I think we just need to agree, yeah, Mexico's probably not going to pay for it, but it's still our country. What are we going to do about it?
Well, I think both sides of the issue want good border security, and kind of the funny thing that gets lost to me personally in a lot of this is some people have tried to make this a race issue, and I've been sort of blown away by the number of legal immigrants that have gone through the process and said, you know what, I went through the process. This isn't about race. It's about going through the process, about a system of laws. So
you're right.
Separating some of those things out, I think, are the important issues for me personally. But I think we need security. I think we got to have some rules, and I think we got to follow the rules. And unfortunately, another part of the government that has really become a train wreck, which I got to see firsthand, is immigration, INS, Immigration Naturalization Services. I mean, the people that work there are hardworking people that are trying to do the right thing. And over the course of the last 30 years, the laws that Congress has dealt them to try to deal with it just they may be the only agency that's more of a mess than State Department because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to, I don't know. The IRS isn't looking too good either.
I think, Barry, I think the better question is, you're an expert in negotiation. How would you handle this? Let me put it this way. I'm going to put you in Trump's position and say you want the wall. Do you think it's necessary for border security, for the country, for the good of the people? So to inhibit illegal immigration and take care of that problem. And I'll use Israel as an example. When they finally built the wall in Israel, the first year they had 6 people who came across who were terrorists that got through the wall. So they built it higher. They've never had another person come through since, period. Done, 0. So it obviously works. So if you take his position saying, this works, so why don't we build it? It's cheap to build compared to everything else. I mean, it's a rounding error for the government to build this wall. So how would you handle the opposition? How would you negotiate this out? Or, could you give a demonstration of what your position would be?
Well, I'll quote the famous, soft, warm, fuzzy negotiator, Hillary Clinton. But the crazy thing is, she, even though she didn't use it, she referred to this thing called empathy. But let's put a little bit of spin on that, because younger Israelis and Palestinians, as you bring them up, have taken the same approach, and they said, "Let's get together. Let's talk about what do we want for our kids? Let's go to a point in the future where we say, how do we build a better tomorrow for the oncoming generations? What do we want to do for our families? Now let's start there. Let's pick a point in the future that we like, and let's work our way back, because we're never going to get anywhere in accusational approach to negotiation. You're a jerk. No, you're a jerk. No, you're a jerk. You said this. You said let's. How do we build a better future for our families? And at that point in time, everybody can agree that we want a better future for our families, and let's work our way back from there.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. And yet at the same time, I'm going to do this Republican-Democrat because I think it's only fair. When the Democrats...
Oh, use the F word on me.
Well...
That's the F word, brother. I mean, you're fair. You calling me unfair. What are you trying to do to me, Chuck? I didn't know this was going to be a hostile interview.
Well, I'm a little hostile, so I'm going to be hostile. So anyway, so the Democrats have the media behind them, so no matter what they say or how outrageous it is, they get backed up by the media, and that's the big bullhorn. So Trump basically is reduced down to having tweets, which everybody hates because he communicates with that. So it starts off all of these quote unquote negotiations with Congress, it starts off screaming at each other and calling each other names before you ever get to the subject.
Yeah, media likes a good food fight, don't they?
Yeah,
they love it when we throw rocks at each other.
It's continuous. It never stops.
Yeah.
What did you think of that, the 13 minutes of video footage from the White House with
that negotiation
and Schumer and the president? Personally, I thought the Schumer's behavior, I don't care who the president is, the way that he behaved speaking to a president of the United States, I think was disrespectful.
Well, you know, the most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. And all three parties walked into that with a slightly different agenda for the media opportunity. You know, and at some point in time, you're just going to have to know what you're walking into and then position yourself for it and expect it.
Well, look, government is so used to doing things behind closed doors and out of sight of the public.
Yeah.
And yet then they're always saying, well, we need more transparency, more transparency. Well, the minute you get transparency, they all run for the corners and say, you know, get those cameras out of here. We don't want people to see what's going on here. This is not for the public to see. This is too messy.
Yeah, we've had a guest who comes on the show frequently. His name's Bart Marcoy, and he used to work in the State Department. And his claim is that one of the reasons things look disturbing to people is because the State Department used to negotiate everything in the back channels, and then the president would show up on the world stage with something that was already negotiated, and he would show up for a ceremonial handshaking. And that this president doesn't have the State Department go and negotiate deals. He shows up himself. So America is seeing the process. Instead of just seeing the ceremony, they're actually seeing the process, which can be ugly.
Yeah, it can be ugly if you resort to a lot of the compromise nonsense. I mean, really the title of my book, Never Split the Difference, because I'm not a big fan of compromise. I mean, compromise is, you know, you don't know what shoes we should wear with this suit, black shoes or brown shoes, and we wear one black and one brown. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, compromise is lazy, and a lot of government has been lazy. You know,
and I agree with that, because if good and evil compromise, evil always has to win in that equation.
Yeah, probably, or evil wins at least some. I mean, you know, compromise is an idea in government has always boggled me, because theoretically compromise and negotiations is good, but who are you if you compromise your principles? Who are you if you compromise your integrity? Then suddenly it's an insult, and I don't like compromise.
Well, Chuck frequently says that his belief is that the founding fathers never intended for government to compromise. They intended that there would be contentious times.
Well, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people that argue that contentious times are necessary for the best product. And you see that play out sometimes. Contention, conflict is necessary for people to work a little bit harder and find the right answers.
Well, you know, you hear the constant cry, can't Trump bring the country together? Why can't he bring the country together? Whoever did. Who ever did, except in times of war? That's about the only time the country comes together that I'm aware of. So what do you want, a war to break out? Why can't the Republicans get along with the Democrats? Well, because they're completely different ideologies. That's why. And it'll never happen. So it's up to the voter to decide who he wants to trump, not to use a word, but who he wants to trump in the Congress and for the presidency to run the country. And if they don't do a good job, then you replace them. We're now down to a point right now, Chris, where it seems like we're deciding between socialist on socialist. There's so many progressive Republicans that are holdovers in that party from the late 1800s that are still there, to Democrats who became totally progressive in the early 1900s and have covered it by names, by using liberal instead of progressive. And then, you know, now they're full on socialists in the party, and they all claim to be, not all of them, but most of them do. So now that whole socialist progressive mantle that they have always worn for the last 100 and some years is now coming out, and they're saying, okay, yes, this is who we are. We believe in big government. That's all we want. And Republicans are in the place where they're saying, well, okay, how can we help you? Because, and I'm not saying all Republicans, but there's a good number of Republicans or people in the Republican Party who literally think that big government's the answer too.
Yeah, I don't get the impression that Republicans are very good negotiators.
Well, with that in mind, that's
they should buy my book.
Exactly.
They need to buy your book.
Let's help them out.
Well,
I mean, you think Republicans are good?
I'm sorry?
I was asking Chris, do you think Republicans are good negotiators overall?
Yeah, you know what? Give me a Reagan Republican.
Well,
yeah, give me somebody.
We would all like to have Reagan back in the party.
That's why I think the biggest difference. You take a little bit of Trump's hard edge off. I mean, Ronald Reagan fired more people than Donald Trump ever thought of firing. But
you're right.
Reagan was a charming guy. I mean, there is all the time. There is, and he got that way the hard way. I think he fired plenty of people. He was a little less charming when he was governor of California. He learned he had to take the hard edge off, but still stick with your principles. I mean, Reagan never compromised on his principles. He never let up on anybody, but he tried to get along with people. He tried to have good relationships. He cracked the occasional joke. I mean, one of my favorites was some White House correspondent was giving him a hard time and saying, are you saying you're not part of the problem at all? And he said, no, absolutely. I admit I'm part of the problem because at one point in time I was a Democrat, and I regret that. So being able to crack a joke every now and then, break the ice, and work on your relationships.
So what we're really talking about here is negotiation by style. How is your style of negotiating? And I think the thing that is so that turns some conservative Republicans who are never Trumpers off and turns the Democrats off and turns a lot of people in the country off is Trump's style, his New York style of negotiation, which that's what I think it is. It's very hard edge. It's very blunt. It's very aggressive. But it's kind of part of where he comes from. I mean, you don't build giant buildings in New York and you don't have to be tough. I mean, come on, let's face it. That's a business he was in. It's a tough, dog eat dog business. And then you got to deal with City Hall. You got to deal with the state. So it's not as if he hasn't been in politics, because he has. He's walked that political line many times trying to get things built and trying to get, whatever waivers he had to have from the city or from the state. He knows all of those people. They know him. Chuck Schumer, they probably didn't have a lot to do with each other, but they knew each other, that's for sure. And Schumer is just as blunt as Trump is in his own way, and so is Nancy Pelosi in her odd kind of, what can I say?
California.
It's her way is blunt and kind of drifting off topics and things of that nature.
It's a little spastic. That's a really good word for it. So anyway, you got all these personalities who are in positions of power, and they're yelling and screaming at each other, trying to get their own way. Or then someone will go, well, now let's all settle down and step back. And nobody wants to settle down and step back. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, my point is the style of Trump is probably what turns a lot of people off. Again, I mean, a major. If I could adjust him by 2 millimeters, I'd ask him to be a little bit more charming. I'd ask him. So
not a big change.
No.
Because everybody that meets him says he's I've never met him, but they say he's a very charming guy, which is kind of interesting. But the minute he puts that negotiating hat on, all the charm goes out the window.
Well, certainly publicly. I mean, he likes to bare knuckle brawl publicly. Certainly, he seems to like that.
Well, he assumes that face. You know what face I'm talking about?
He gets a scowl, right? He gets a bit of a scowl.
Exactly.
It's the I'm sucking on a lemon thing, actually.
Yeah. Well. Hey, Mark, let's take a break and talk about our friends at Dermat.
Moisturizing anti-itch cream. If you itch, Durham's the ticket. It really does work, folks. It's a great. I don't know what the professional terms are for senior itch, but I just know as you get older, you start to itch, and especially in the wintertime when you're home and it's real dry inside the house and everything. And you put this on, it's a great moisturizing cream, so it keeps your skin nice and supple, and at the same time, it will relieve an itch like that. It just is awesome. And so good for just anything, bug bites, whatever. It really works. So go by CVS, Walgreens, and other stores and find Dermend anti-itch products, along with a lot of other products that they have, and they're all excellent products.
And steroid-free.
You'll pay a little bit more, but you'll get so much more for it.
Steroid-free, and I just love hearing Chuck Woolery say the word supple. But that's me.
So the president, when the president was on Twitter calling Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man,
right,
and taunting him and telling him, I have a button and it's bigger than yours and mine works, was that a negotiation tactic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Public statements and negotiations, you just got to understand what you're doing or who you're trying to appeal to, what buttons you're trying to punch. And so, that was a negotiation. And look, Democrat or Republican, he's got North Korea at the table. He's done something that no Democrat or Republican president has been able to do in how many years? 50 years? I mean, how long has this been a problem?
And he did it on his own, by the way, not with the State Department, not with anybody. He did it on his own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, he didn't create the problem either. This is a problem he inherited.
And then another thing is he goes over to Europe and they all criticize him for being a patriot. It's not patriotism, it's nationalism, blah, 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 and all this. And they're literally falling apart over there. He was right.
Yeah, well, you hate him when he's right?
I mean, think about it. Look at Merkel, look at May, look at Macron. These people are in trouble.
Well, they're good at pointing out our problems, that's for sure.
And they're over there chanting Trump. The French are actually chanting Trump's name
in the streets.
Yeah, is that another word for croissant or something in France?
Croissant actually doesn't come from France. Croissant comes from Vienna, Austria. Did you know that?
That is exactly the kind of fascinating information that I love.
Okay, so the Muslims were about to invade Austria, Vienna. And a baker at 4:00 in the morning heard them tunneling under his bakery. And he informed the police, who informed the army. They got the Muslims cornered. They killed all of them. They just destroyed them, because they caught them all in the tunnel. And so they went back to two things happened. They went back to their tents and they found this stuff because they always seemed so energetic and they couldn't figure out why. And they found a tent with bags of this stuff in it. Well, that stuff was coffee. They'd never seen coffee before. That was one thing that came out of it. The next thing that came out of it, in honor of winning that battle, the baker invented the croissant, which was looks like
the moon from the
like the crescent moon for Muslims, and he invented the croissant. And then,
this is the Battle of Austria. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the Battle of Austria, right? And the French got all the credit for it, which is kind of weird.
Well, that took a hard left turn, didn't it? For a minute?
He said he was interested in that I thought I'd just lay that out for him. It's kind of an interesting story.
How often does Chuck take a hard left turn?
About every 4 to 6 minutes.
Well, I find myself incredibly interesting. I'm sorry.
Well, what I've learned now is when he makes those left turns, you don't actually try to stop him. You just wait until he makes 3 more, and then then you're back on the road, and you just keep going.
This is that surge of thrill when you wipe out your best friend.
So you did this negotiating for people's lives. You've handled some pretty high profile cases. What do you do when you're doing something like that? When you're looking at an auto warm beer deal or someone, the Iranian crisis, how do you I guess my first question, how do you negotiate with a lunatic? I mean, some of these people that you've had to deal with had to be complete nut cases.
Yeah, well, while we may think they're crazy, everybody has a pattern. Everybody has patterns. I mean, it's ridiculous how predictable people are once you let go of the pattern you think they should be in and you recognize the pattern they are in. And so you look for the patterns, and then you let them tell you what's important to them by reading between the lines.
Can you give us an example of something that you did where you saw the pattern, what the pattern was?
Well, yeah, we worked a number of cases in the Middle East against Al Qaeda, which was later on was ISIS, and their pattern was they didn't care one way about the hostage. They didn't care one way how it actually impacted the United States. They were interested in recruiting. They were interested in making a big splash, and they were interested in what they look like. And they started engaging in the same pattern over and over again, which, we jumped up and down and stamped our feet. That's exactly what they wanted, because they wanted to show international frustration. So you start picking out what they're really looking for as opposed to what they're saying or what they're actually doing. And then it just gets kind of easy knowing where it's going. And then your choice is, all right, do I like where it's going? Do I want to speed it up? If I don't like where it's going, do I want to slow it down and maybe send it on another track? And they've got an amount of time that they're looking for. You always know in advance about how long they expect it's going to take. And as soon as you start changing the timeline by either accelerating it or slowing it down, then it throws them off their game and they don't know what to do.
So you're saying that, if I'm understanding you, when we're negotiating, is one of the issues from our own standpoint is no matter how rational we think we are, we're still being emotional, and we're trying to get the other people to behave like we want them to behave, like we want them to behave, instead of just observing how they behave and trying to work inside that framework?
Yeah, it's pretty much it. I mean, our rationality is based on what we care about. Rationality is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's completely in the eye of the beholder, based on what you care about, what you think is beautiful, what you value. And as soon as somebody starts valuing other things, and most people just lose their mind over it. Like, I don't know what to do. What are they thinking? Well, what they're thinking is real obvious. You just got to get out of your own way to see it. And that's the crazy thing about, empathy, tactical empathy. We know too much about empathy to be naive about it anymore. We know exactly how the brain works. Who are the best practitioners of this approach? Daniel Goleman would call it cognitive empathy, but sociopaths. Because sociopaths don't really care. All they want to know is what works. And it's really easy for them to spot what you value, because they don't value anything, therefore they don't get in their own way.
That's an interesting point. I never thought about that, but you're right. The sociopaths actually have no value except their own self-interest.
Yeah.
So they're not really arguing for a cause. They just want to win.
Yeah, they don't get bent out of shape because your values are different from theirs. They just want to know what works. And interestingly enough, this approach is the most effective approach. I wish Adam Grant wrote a really interesting article. Adam Grant, another brilliant writer out there. I mean, brilliant guy. Wharton.
Who is he? Who is Adam Grant?
Wharton negotiation professor wrote wrote Give and Take. He wrote a book called Originals.
So this would be somebody that Trump probably knows very well, right? Wharton School? That's where he went to school.
Yeah, he did. Donald Trump has to be aware of who Adam Grant is. Mm-hmm. Trump knows too much to not know people that are that smart.
Well, for a guy who doesn't read, he knows a lot.
Yeah, he's good at picking stuff up, isn't he? Yeah. But Adam wrote a piece, I believe it was called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence, which the fact of the matter is, if you get really good at emotional intelligence, your ability to influence other people is insane. And, it's a tool, like a telephone is a tool. And some people use it for bad, some people use it for good. And if you get really good at emotional intelligence, if you get really good at empathy, your ability to influence other people's decision making is absolutely through the roof.
Mm-hmm. This was somewhat run down the lines of like neurolinguistics programming too.
A lot of overlap between that stuff. Yeah, an awful lot of overlap. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So how would you score the president, knowing that there's a couple of rough edges you'd like to take off on him? Overall, how would you score his negotiating track record so far as president?
I think his foreign policy track record is really high. I think his domestic political track record is low, and it's not going to rise. He's doing phenomenal things for us. You know, North Korea, tremendous success. We're making progress there. I think the Iran deal was ridiculous. I happened to be in the West Bank about 8 years ago, 2008, right at the very beginning of the Obama administration. We're sitting with the Palestinian leadership, and they said, "Oh, this is horrible," because no American president ever wants a foreign policy initiative until the second half of their second term. And with Obama coming into office now, we got to wait at least 8 years because American presidents are eminently predictable. The second half of their second term, they try to hit a foreign policy home run. Now, the problem with that is, which is exactly what the Obama administration did, the Iranians know that administration is going to get desperate because they put a clock on themselves. There's a deadline. They're going to be desperate for a deal, which is what they were. The big advantage that Donald Trump has got going for us now is he doesn't care about those deadlines. He's the first American president since Bush 41 that was willing to do deals internationally at the very beginning. And now the people on the other side go, we don't know what his deadlines are. We're going to have to negotiate on a much leveler, more level playing field. And he's going to do some stuff for us in foreign policy because he's not going to be bound by his term. He's going to want to get stuff done, and he's going to do a really good job for us, foreign policy wise, I believe.
Now, where do you think he's failed domestically?
Well, first time he sat down with Pelosi and Schumer in the White House, oh, we love each other. We've worked all this out. You know, things are wonderful. And then it went sideways as soon as they left. The problem is he's becoming unpredictable, and now people don't know how to make a deal with him domestically because they think he won't stick to it.
Give me an example of what deal, like what kind of deal?
It was the first time Pelosi and Schumer went into the White House. It was, I thought they were going to, they were hugging and kissing. Everything's wonderful. It was the first crisis. He invited Pelosi and Schumer into the White House. It was about a year and a half ago because he was having trouble with the Republican leadership. He couldn't get what he wanted out of the House.
Right, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
So he brings them in, and they thought they had deals. They thought they'd worked everything out. Pelosi and Schumer were like, hey, this guy isn't that bad. We can work with this guy. What's happened since then? Now, Pelosi and Schumer go into the White House. The only thing they can be guaranteed is there's going to be an argument. Unfortunately, at some point in time, they're going to have to make deals that both sides stick to. And domestically now, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're not 1,000% sure what's going to get stuck to or what kind of a conversation you're going to walk into. And how do we move forward at all? Everybody's got to be confused by this.
Now, on the other side of balance is you have Democrats, media. I've never seen anything like this, the constant assault on Trump. So the lashing out, or I'm going to fire back at you, I'm not going to just lay here and let you, bomb me until you obliterate me. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to punch back, which he does. Is this all a part of what you're talking about because he started punching back?
I don't think it's necessarily punching back. And I mean, how often are you going to wave a red flag at a bull and not expect the bull to charge? Mm-hmm. I mean, we got a long history.
Do you think he wanted it to charge? I mean,
yeah, I think he likes a good fight, and he hasn't had enough. He's never been stuck in this position before where he can't get away from the media. And
it's interesting, though, Chris, it seems to me like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know, it just seems to me like, that Trump, as opposed to most presidents, maybe all presidents, is thriving in this environment of kind of chaos. And you know, even when the media is coming after him and everything else, he really likes the battle. He's not getting old in office. He seems to enjoy it.
Well, when you're assertive, you like a good fight. I mean, it's short term. It's very satisfying. Problem is, he's in the same office he's been in. He's not moving from city to city. He's not moving from country to country. You know, he operated in New York, then he operated in Atlantic City, then he started putting up buildings all over the world. He's never kind of been confined like this before, and which is the nature of being president of the United States. And you're in a White House. At some point in time, you got to figure out a way to collaborate with people you really kind of don't like, because we're going to get stuck. We're going to have a shutdown. Some of the government probably needs to be burned down. You know, what I've always looked forward to in this process, having spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., some of the institutions are there because that's the way it's going to have to be. And some of them have got out of control, and bureaucracies need some really serious trimming. And the American people have always liked a president who's going to come to D.C. and shake up the bureaucracy. I mean, Carter was elected because he wasn't a D.C. insider. Clintons were elected because they weren't D.C. insiders. Both sides are tired of the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. and want somebody that's really going to sort of tear it down a little bit, and he's done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, boy, he certainly is an outsider. There's no question. We've never seen anybody like him. Never.
No, that's a scary thing, and it's good and it's bad simultaneously.
I'm looking forward to meeting. I'm going to the White House for I've been invited to the White House reception on Christmas, so I'm going to go and I'll see him for the first time. He's the second president I will have ever seen in my life in person.
Who was your first one?
Truman. I was 7 years old in town, and the train came through, and he got on the back of the train and gave a speech, and I was 7, and that was the first president I ever saw in my life. And this is now the...
Well, you put a gap between those two, didn't you?
Yeah. You think?
Yeah, I was gonna throw a joke out there, but I was scared to make you mad, Chuck.
No, go ahead, throw it.
Lincoln, like who was the first one?
Well, Lincoln was, I don't know. By the way, speaking of Lincoln, I'm glad you brought him up. He was another president who was under fire all the time. I mean, people think that Lincoln was this great president, and he was. There's no question about that. But the country was torn apart, and his presidency was under assault morning, noon, and night.
They all kind of were. You see these guys after a while, and Reagan was told, if you want a friend in D.C., get a dog. Clinton got a dog.
Actually, I think that was Truman that said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog.
Yeah, so that's a tough job, right?
Well, it is, but I mean, wow! It's we think this is the thing that I think fascinating is as Americans, we know so little about history, and we're so disinterested in history that we don't go into it enough to know that this has all happened before. So many of these things have happened before, and we survived them. We got through them. We still did fine, and we advanced, and we're a great nation. I mean, everybody's trying to make us a socialist nation instead of a capitalist nation, and yet nobody knows. Anybody who's talking about socialism doesn't understand capitalism. I mean, it's ridiculous. But we've been through this before, and it's a little more dynamic now than it has been in the past. But all of these things have seen their place in history at one time or another. I mean, my God, you can go through the history of the Roman Empire over their 2,000-year history and pretty much put together everything that's happening in this country in a more condensed period of time. It's almost exactly like it.
And one of the things I like about what you just said too is we are a great nation. I mean, we should always be proud of the United States. We absolutely. I'm an unabashed patriot.
And we've always been a great nation.
Yeah.
We go through our growing pains.
But we now have people like Cuomo who are saying America was never great, and Obama who went around the world apologizing for us. I mean, we have a lot of people in this country, including people with a voice, with power, who do not like the United States. They do not like who we are. They do not like the principles and the values that the country was built upon.
That, I think, is a real problem, but it's nothing new.
And how can you negotiate with that, Chris? If my position is I believe that the Constitution is the law of the land, and I believe that government should be small, and I believe that government should have limitations on it. If that's what I believe, and now I have to negotiate with a side that believes in socialism, that believes in Marxism, that believes in bigger government, that believes in this authoritarian approach to living, how can you negotiate with that?
Well, and the same approach that I would talk about before, because tactical empathy, empathy for the other side, empathy is not sympathy, empathy is not agreement. So I can restate your position. I mean, it's the old Stephen Covey advice: seek first to understand, then be understood. Let's pretend that Covey was a sociopath, which he wasn't. Mm-hmm. But let's pretend like the only thing he wanted was to make his point. Trial and error, he came to realize, I need to let you feel like you made your point, and then you'll be open to mine. And it's a very indirect route, but it's a real time saver. So if I was negotiating with someone that was a socialist, I'd say, what you believe in is that there should be a better tomorrow for everybody, that everybody should be taken care of, that nobody should go hungry. And you believe that for us to abandon and ignore the downtrodden is wrong. I'm going to restate their position, okay, which is going to kind of bring them back to I'm trying to hit the reset button with the other side. I'm trying to get their ears open. So
you're talking about reflective.
Yeah.
It's reflective. Type.
Yeah. You really aren't asking for me to agree. You're probably just asking me to understand. And if I can draw a real clear distinction between those two things, I mean, I'll give you an example. First World Trade Center bombing, 1993. We tried those guys in civilian court, and they were Al-Qaeda. They were the beginnings of Al-Qaeda. The guy that organized that bombing is a nephew of the guy that organized 9/11. Ramzi Youssef was the first World Trade Center bomber organizer, and his uncle is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. We tried him in open court, civilian court. We didn't need Guantanamo. We convicted everybody. Mm-hmm. And Muslim witnesses testified against Muslims in open American court. Muslims testified voluntarily. And most of them, we'd sit down with them and we'd say, you know what, you believe that American government has been anti-Islamic for over 200 years. And they'd get this shock look on their face. And my point was, I never said it was. I said, you believe that. Mm-hmm. And though that tiny little 2 millimeter adjustment in what we said to them, to borrow Tony Robbins' phrase, they trusted us and they believed in us, and they testified in open court. And one of the most gratifying moments was, because they always used to say, from our countries, tell us what to say. And we'd say, our prosecutor, Pat Fitzgerald, the guy who convicted Scooter Libby, mm-hmm. Pat Fitzgerald used to just say to him, just tell the truth. And they'd say, no, seriously, what do you want us to say? And Fitz would say, just tell the truth. I don't care what you say, tell the truth. And they came up to us afterwards and they said, we thought you were kidding, but you really meant it. The American judicial system is about telling the truth.
So you have to overcome cultural differences too, you're saying.
You overcome those because you recognize them first. You don't tell the other side they're wrong. You say, here's what you believe. And it seems stupid. Most people have trouble adjusting to it because they feel like they're giving in.
No, it doesn't, because here's what happens. The minute you're talking about empathy, the minute you talk to someone or you listen to someone and then reflect back everything they said to you, they think you understand them. They believe that you understand them. They believe that you've heard them. And then they become very trusting to you because they believe you just told them, or you just reiterated what they said. So you're saying to me, this, and this. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying to you. Oh, you get it. Yeah.
And then just don't equate understanding to agreement.
Right. Not that you agree with them, it's just you understand it.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce you to a new type of podcast. And by new, I mean there's never been anything like this before, not in terms of scope or ambition. The show's called Living Beyond 120. Science proved that lifespan could exceed 120 years back in the 1960s. And the Bible first mentioned living to 120 years 6,000 years ago in the book of Genesis. But the question is, how do we get there? Living Beyond 120 tries to answer this question. The show is an exploration into human longevity and what it will take for us to live longer, healthier lives, featuring interviews with some of the most respected minds in longevity science and tackling big subjects like how the medical system, big pharma, and maybe even our own government don't want you to live longer. Living Beyond 120. It's hosted by me and my co-host, medical expert, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. You'll find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast directory, and you can also listen to it at the website livingbeyond120.com. So what do you think happened? We've got General Flynn in the news right now, and it's been really interesting this morning because he's got this plea deal where no jail time, and now General Flynn is actually striking back at this moment. He's claiming that they set him up, that they were skilled negotiators, they were skilled interviewers, and they set him up. This guy ran an intelligence operation, didn't he? I mean, wasn't he the head of military intelligence at one point?
Yeah, it kind of you look at his resume. I don't know. I mean.
Well, if I had to guess, I think he thought he was talking to friendly people. He was talking to now people who are under Trump's authority. They weren't Obama's guys anymore, but they were part of the Obama administration that wanted to take Trump out. This was all prior to people understanding what the hell was going on. And so I think that he invited them in thinking, well, look, these guys are like me, and I can tell them anything I want to tell them. I don't have anything to hide. So, sure, I don't need a lawyer. I don't need anything. I'll just, give you a tour of the White House and I'll talk to you. No problem. It's intelligence to intelligence. We're on the same team. They didn't know. He had no idea they were out to get him.
But he did lie to them, though, I think, right?
From what I understand, and perhaps Chris can, clear this up, he omitted something. He said they asked him something about when he talked to the Russians, which was fine. He was in the transition team. He's supposed to talk to the Russians. He's supposed to talk to, correct? He's supposed to talk to all these people. They're transitioning. So they asked him if he had a conversation about sanctions. And he said, no, that didn't come up. Well, in fact, it had come up. And he, later came back and said, this did come up, and they wouldn't let him amend it, and that was it. And then they were off to the races, and that was what they got him on, was not mentioning that the sanctions had been discussed with Russian, everybody in Russia's intelligence. I mean, there's nobody that's not, I suppose. But they were diplomats.
What do you mean? You're trying to say the Russians are deceptive? You mean they?
No, everybody connected to the government is a spy. They all are.
All right, connected to the government, not everybody in Russia.
Right. Well, I said about the government.
You're gonna send somebody to go meet with a White House official. You better assume that you're in a hostile environment.
Well, the interesting thing about what they caught him on was a taped conversation. You think he didn't know when he's on the telephone to these people it's not being taped? He was in intelligence. Of course he knew it was being taped.
Russians are listening to us right now, aren't they?
Probably.
Well, that's funny you say that, because we actually get analytics that show where all the listeners are to this program. And we have hundreds of listeners, not thousands, but we have hundreds of listeners in Russia.
Are they all in the same building in Moscow?
Probably.
I've never looked to see how tightly close they are, but we actually have a lot of people in Russia that listen to the program. So let's take this down to a personal level for a minute, Chuck, if we can do that.
Sure.
Because we got got a negotiating expert. So let's
get personal. All right, here we go.
So let's get some benefits, some personal benefits for the audience. Walk me through what are the best things that Chuck can do, I can do when we want to, it's negotiating with your wife, your kids.
That's the best thing you can do. Negotiating with your wife is the best.
Yeah.
Everybody has to do that every day.
Right. How do we do it? And I seriously, desperately want this information.
Now, you take the time to hear the other side out. I mean, it's a time hack. There was a senior female executive, senior male executive, fiancés. They're now married, Silicon Valley. Big fans of our stuff now because one day the fiancé says to her husband to be, I really like talking to you these days. What's going on? And he kind of puts his head down and says, well, I'm in this negotiation class. And they're making me do this stuff that I'm learning from this book, Never Split the Difference, and making me use it on people in my personal life to get good at it. And she went out and bought copies of the book for all of her girlfriends, husbands, and boyfriends.
So walk us through it. What do we do? I mean, obviously, we need to buy the book and read the book, but kind of give us a little Reader's Digest version.
Well, it's a little bit of, paraphrase what the other side said before you make your point.
Now, would you do thinking? Well, let me ask a question. Now you're familiar with Milton Erickson, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I'm sure I'm familiar with his work.
Milton Erickson's really the father of modern hypnosis. So Erickson's approach to mirroring people was not to paraphrase, but it was to use their exact words. Would you use the exact words, or are you more of paraphrasing what they're feeling?
I'm going to get into what they're feeling. It depends upon which of the exact words and how long or short I want to go. I mean, there's a couple different hostage negotiation skills that we use in business. Like I may repeat the exact words, but only maybe 3 or 4 of those exact words because I want you to clarify that. I mean, I can flip a switch in your head and get you to expand and clarify by just picking out 3 words.
Okay, so that's very much like
Chris,
him.
How about if you say to the person, so this is how I understand what you're saying. You're saying blah, 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 blah. Is that right? And then they say, no, that's not exactly right. That's close, but that's not it. This is what I'm saying. Oh, so you're saying this, blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's it.
Right. That's real close to what we're talking about. That I do 2 adjustments to that. The very first part you said, now this is what I understand. Mm-hmm. I hits the brain in a little bit different way than you does. And I drop out I, first of all. I'd say, all right, so this is what you're feeling. Instead of saying, this is what I hear that you're feeling. Mm-hmm. The other thing we'd probably coach you to do was, see, you're a yes addict, Chuck. I'm sorry.
I'm what?
You're a yes addict. Oh. You went for a yes at the end.
Yeah, that's
you wanted that confirmation yes.
The payoff.
I see.
And I wouldn't do that either.
No.
And then because then you get more. Actually, you kind of get more cleanly into their brain processes in the back. And they start responding to you in a much more unguarded way, much more unvarnished.
So Erickson, he would do something like this. He would say, how are you feeling? And I would say, I'm very angry and I'm frustrated right now. And Erickson would say, you're very frustrated right now. He would just take a short piece of that sentence and just repeat it back.
Yeah, and that's focusing on how they feel as opposed to what they said. And
right, because he would ask them how they feel.
Right. You get because our thought processes, our memories, our decisions are based on how we feel about stuff. And I'm going to get a lot faster, better information out of that by just, because your memories are what all your thoughts are attached to, or your feelings. So let me pull your feeling. If I ask you about something what happened at 3:00 yesterday, and you say, hell, I don't know. But if I could remind you of how you felt at 3:00 yesterday, the memory would come right back.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking with our wife. Our wife's mad about something. You say, Well, how are you feeling right now? Well, I'm angry. All right, so you're angry right now.
Well, with the wife,
what's our next step?
Here's what I start with. The wife wants you to do a read. She wants you to already know how she's feeling because you know her.
I refer to that as the subliminal contract. We're supposed to already know what they know and how we're supposed to respond to it without anybody saying anything. Well, it's a subliminal contract, and if you break the contract, you are on the couch.
Yeah, you can read the wife so fast. So instead of saying how you feeling today, you can look at it and say, "Wow, long day, huh?"
Because let me ask you something, and I'm going to inject my personal life here, which I never do, is like this. But I'm in a relationship. I've been in this relationship for going on 4 years, and we tell her parents this, we tell her children this. No one believes this. Mark may believe this. I don't know. We have never, in almost 4 years, had a cross word with each other.
No, I know that to be the case.
Never. Now, her parents don't believe it.
That's awesome. Nice job.
I mean, is that awesome or what?
Yeah.
Chris, I'm going to tell you something about Chuck, which I think makes him a bad negotiator.
Probably true.
I don't think Chuck's a good negotiator. And that's why he doesn't negotiate. So here's the problem. Chuck is the most honest human being that you have ever met in your life. Mm-hmm. Chuck will tell you the truth when it's probably a very inappropriate use of the truth at that moment, but he can't help himself.
True.
So is that a weakness for him in negotiating?
No, I think you should tell people the truth. I mean, and without really saying it, maybe he doesn't do it 1,000% of the time, but the way you described it also makes me think that Chuck is concerned about how it lands. It doesn't always land the way he wants it to, but he's thinking about how it lands.
Sometimes it lands as a perfect three-pointer, another time it's right into the ground. There's
got to be a consciousness there about man.
No, but that's the issue though. He is honest to a fault.
I am a little naive. I know this about myself, but I don't mind. I would rather be a little naive than cynical. So that's my choice.
That's a youthful approach to life too. That'll keep you on a planet a lot longer.
I was in a mediation recently, and I was with a couple of lawyers that work for us. And part of the conversation we had was people, and this is my belief, I believe that people judge other people based on their own values. So I think that if you are inherently a bad person, then you believe everyone else is a bad person. Therefore, you're immediately distrusting anyone that's sitting across the table from you. And I think if you're like Chuck, who wants to believe the best in people, then when you sit across the table, you think the person on the other side is an honest person too. And this is two honest people trying to come up with a solution. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I think actually it's kind of, if the academics have a term for it, then you know it happens a lot. And academics would call that projection bias.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay. I could see that. What other type of biases get into people when they're trying to negotiate? I mean, are we looking for confirmation bias? I mean, what else gets in the way? What muddles up our process?
You know, there's kind of a whole line of thinking built around two brilliant Israeli psychologists, Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and it's called prospect theory, and they nailed the biases.
It's called what?
Prospect theory.
I've read it.
Yeah, and there's actually 3 really good books out there, depending upon what you want to read. Now, Danny Kahneman's got a book out called Thinking Fast
and Slow.
It's a brilliant,
awesome book.
Danny, and forgive me for referring to him as Danny because I don't know him. I've studied him so much, I feel like I do. But he's an academic. He's a deep thinker. I mean, this is a heavy read. It's a brilliant read. It's worth the effort, but it's a heavy read. Now, Michael Lewis, the author of The Big Short and Moneyball, wrote a book called The Undoing Project. And he goes heavy into Kahneman and Tversky in that. And that's a much more entertaining read. And Michael Lewis is a much more entertaining writer. He's not an academic. And I'd recommend both books. It's
Daniel
great.
Kahneman's book, Chuck, I would tell you, it's 3 inches, 4 inches thick.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one of those books, because you know the way I'll burn through stuff?
Yep.
Daniel Kahneman's book is where I will read a half a chapter to a chapter at a time, and I have to set it down and just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes go back to that chapter and say, okay, I need to go back and confirm what they just said. It's deep reading. It's very academic.
I did the same thing with Moby Dick.
With Moby Dick, okay. What do you think of Robert Cialdini?
Cialdini's brilliant stuff. I've been lucky enough to share the stage with him a couple different times. If you're into persuasion, influence, negotiation, his book, The Psychology of Influence, is one of your Bibles.
Have you met Robert? Have you met Bob?
I have crossed paths with Robert several times. And
good guy.
He's probably forgotten who I am, but I'm a fan. I love his stuff, and I think he's a brilliant guy.
Well, Chris, we won't forget who you are. You've been a fascinating guest. We've really enjoyed having you. And thank you very much for coming on the show. I really do. It's very nice to meet you.
Where can people get your book?
I'll offer two things. Best price for the book is on Amazon. My company, we put out a free negotiation newsletter, and it is the gateway to all of our training. And if people want to sign up for the newsletter, it's free. It's complimentary. It's at federal price. If it's free, I'll take 3.
And where do people sign up at?
Send a text to the number 22828, 22828. Send the text FBI empathy, all one word. Don't let your spell check put a space between that. You get a text message back to sign up, and we'll start sending you stuff for free.
Okay, now give me that again. It's 2828?
228.
28.
Yeah, 22828, 22828.
And FBI empathy.
FBI empathy, all one word. Small, lowercase. Don't put a space between FBI and empathy.
And we will have links to that in the show notes at bluntforcetruth.com, as well as a link to the book. Do you have other books or just this one?
At the moment, it's the only one we have out.
Anything new coming out?
We one of the guys on our team, Derek Gaughan, is going to put out a leadership book early next year, and we're going to collaborate with Tal Roz and probably put out another negotiation book in about 2.5 years. Well,
terrific. Well, I hope when you do that, at Allbeans, that you'll come back and talk about that book with us.
And I thank you very much, because I feel like you validated me.
He completed you. You complete me, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
You guys are a lot of fun. Thank you.
We enjoyed having you. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye. So, Chris was great. I really enjoyed his approach to things. He's a very smart guy, obviously, very well read.
He's got that Southern charm that just kind of creeps up on you. You can see him in a negotiation, can't you?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting from a guy from New Hampshire to have that.
I know, but that style of speech, I know, that style of speech he has, I think people equate that Southern charm as not being that smart or being that deadly. I think those guys are brilliant at just climbing right up on top of you, and you don't know what happened to you.
Yeah, I never underestimate people from the South.
No, I wouldn't suggest.
It's very interesting, though. We're talking about all these, these negotiating tools and everything else. And it's interesting what you just said, because we have a tendency to do that because of our bias. If people use improper English or whatever, we immediately, in the back of our heads, if we know what is right and what isn't, what's acceptable and what isn't, we immediately judge them as being inferior, when it can be a grave mistake if you're actually negotiating with them or whatever, your involvement is with them. But people do it automatically.
Absolutely. Well, I'm actually going to, all the books that he's talked about, I've read, but I haven't read his. So I'm actually going to get his book and read it.
Okay.
I think it'd be pretty interesting. So I wanted to run something by you here. I was doing did an episode yesterday of American Checklist with Dan Sullivan, who you know.
Yep.
And Dan is, you know Dan, and his ability to drill down and find the core of something is brilliant.
Right.
And this is what he came up with.
Okay.
Socialism. First off, he points out that capitalism is an operating system where socialism is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that socialism is based in anger and in envy. And his point is that anyone who has a practice of gratitude cannot be a socialist, that the two cannot coexist.
Yeah, Dennis Prager made a statement interesting about that. He said, if you are grateful, it is very difficult to be angry.
But Dan's claim is if you are grateful, you can't even be a socialist. And here's his reason. His reason is if you have gratitude in your heart, then one, you're grateful for whatever it is you have.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you're grateful for what someone else has. You don't feel what someone else has is yours.
You know, that's true, and yet it's not human nature. Human nature is to be jealous. It just is, unless you learn to do it another way or you are another way. But that's how socialism. You know, socialism on paper sounds great. It really does, but it just doesn't work. And of course, it's been proven throughout history that it doesn't work. Democracy doesn't work. That's been proven throughout history that democracy doesn't work. And yet, how many people today talk about, you know, we're spreading democracy, but it doesn't work. There's so many systems that are political ideologies, and of course, socialism is really a economic system, and it just does not work. It sounds great. It feels good, but it doesn't work. And it is based in anger, and it is based in everything. It's interesting how, if I were Satan, I would use all of the imperfections in a man or a woman, we'll just say people generally, all those imperfections to perfect a system that would work against them. And socialism, communism, fascism, those are those systems.
They are. So I'm going to answer a question for you now that you've asked in the past, and neither one of us had an answer for. Your question in the past was, even though we've had Republican and Democratic presidents, why are the majority of people in government, why are the majority of the bureaucrats socialists?
Right. And they are.
And I have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because socialism is a system that does not include accountability.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't.
So it attracts people who do not want to live in a world of accountability.
Mm-hmm. Boy, you look at Washington, it's really, as I was talking to our last guest, and I said I'm more naive than cynical because that's what I choose. But I must tell you something. In the last years that I have really gotten into the political arena along with you, I have become far more cynical, looking at our government, looking at people running our government, looking at what its goals are, what the left's goals are in this country. It's difficult not to be, because they are the antithesis to what capitalism, free market, free market economics, what our founding principles are. And I hate to see those go by the wayside, and I hate to see them trashed by the left and people believing that and falling into that trap, because it will hurt our nation. It really will, and it is hurting our nation.
You look at President Obama, or former President Obama, and Hillary Clinton, and these are people that have never actually had positions in their life that had a form of accountability.
Right. They've always been in politics or in academics, but politics mostly.
Because universities are the other body of no accountability.
Right.
You have tenure and you're not accountable. Right. So these people grew up in a world of no accountability. Now you bring Donald Trump in, who has spent his life in a world of accountability.
Yeah, you either deliver or you're gone.
Right. You either produce or you go bankrupt, which has happened to him a few times in some of his businesses, but business is accountability. Now you take and you bring in a president who has a focus on accountability, and you drop him into the middle of an organization that is dedicated to no accountability. And now you understand what the conflict is.
Of course, they say, and this is true to a certain extent, but not completely, that the people will hold you accountable.
People don't hold bureaucrats accountable, though.
They don't.
You can't fire them.
No. They can fire them. They cannot vote for them again.
No, I'm talking about bureaucrats.
Oh, bureaucrats. That's whole different. That's
the whole deep state.
Right. You're right about that. They can't be fired.
You can't get rid of them.
They did what Franklin even said, don't do this, and they unionized all of it. So, once they're in the union, that's it.
Right. There's no accountability. And even back to your point of politicians.
Try to fire a teacher. I mean,
right.
forget universities and colleges and things like that in tenure. Just a sixth grade teacher. Try to fire one.
Now, they did manage to fire a teacher last week who...
It's got to be on sexual things, though.
No, she held the kid down and shaved his head while she was screaming the national anthem with different words.
Good Lord. Oh, my gosh.
I'm not making that up.
What? Oh, my gosh.
I am not making that up. She pinned the kid down and shaved his hair off with a razor while singing distorted words to the national anthem.
Have you seen?
And she was screaming them, and it's on video.
Have you seen these kids? I've seen this picture of all these boys who the photographer, who's not he's like a guy who has a phone thing. I don't know what it was 3 years ago. They're all standing out in front of the school, and he said, "Okay, wave goodbye to your parents," and everybody went like this.
And now they're trying to say it was a Nazi salute.
It was a Nazi salute. I'm sure these kids all got together and went, "Yeah, let's do a Nazi salute." Wave goodbye to your parents. Bye. And that caught him in this thing. Their fingers were just a little too tightly closed. I mean, good night, folks. We are in an upside down world. I mean, and the apologies and the contortions, the pretzel-like contortions are going through to disarm each other and say, "Oh, we didn't mean it, and we're sorry," and blah, 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 just never end. Anyway, on that bright note, thanks for listening to us today. We hope you enjoyed the show. I'm Chuck Woolery along with Mark Young, and he's got one more thing to say.
Don't forget to go to bluntforcetruth.com daily to get your news feed.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.